There's nothing more controversial and more contested in Western culture than issues dealing with sex. Are we created by God, male and female? Today, most influential voices in the culture would say no. God doesn't determine our gender identity. We do, and without any concern for biology or anatomy. And gender isn't binary, it's an ever-growing list that's as limitless as the human imagination. And what about sexual intercourse? Well, that's just a form of recreation. But is this true? What is sex? Words are precious conveyors of reality. They not only shape the way that we think, but they determine our choices and our actions. And they shape the kind of cultures that we live in. If you want to change society, you begin by changing language. Our adversary knows this all too well. In recent decades, a strategic redefining of many critical words has led to dramatic cultural changes for the worse. People have absorbed these false redefinitions uncritically, including many Christians. And in doing so, they've become unwitting agents in advancing non-Christian systems of belief that are tearing our nation apart. This is a disaster for the church and for the society. To turn things around, we have to recover the true definitions of at least 10 critical words. One of these words is sex. Sex has two primary meanings. First, sex is the God-created distinction between male and female. You see, our bodies, they're not meaningless matter. They're the magnificent handiwork of a loving God. They exhibit order, design, and purpose. As the psalmist beautifully expressed, "You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." God deliberately created both male and female to demonstrate the fullness of His image and likeness. We read about this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female, He created them. Your sex, male or female, is essential to who you are. It's a gift you receive. It's not a choice you make. Todd Wilson, the author of Mere Sexuality, said it well. Your most basic vocation is to joyfully embrace and faithfully embody your sexuality, whether male or female, for the good of others. God created us male and female because neither alone could reflect all that it means to be made in the image of God. It takes both to reveal God's comprehensive nature. In the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we see a unity without uniformity and a diversity without superiority. So when God created man in His image, He created a complementary pair that display this same unity and diversity. Men and women are two creatures amazingly alike and wonderfully different, said Elizabeth Elliot. How different? In a popular TED Talk, cardiologist Paula Johnson tells us men and women are different down to the cellular and molecular level. We're different across all of our organs, from our brains to our heart to our lungs and even our joints. God created these differences to complement one another. The opposite sex isn't some strange creature from another planet, says Todd Wilson, but it's God's gift to you as your complement, whether you're male or female. To have a male body is to have a body structurally ordered to a loving union with a female body, and vice versa, says Anglican theologian Oliver O'Donovan. Here, we find the other meaning of sex, sexual intercourse between a man and a woman. In Genesis 1:28, we read, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." God created us male and female with this extraordinary capacity to be fruitful and multiply, to bear and raise offspring, to form families, cultures, and nations. It's biologically impossible for two men or two women to procreate. It requires two distinct sexual organs, one male and one female, to create a unique, priceless human being who will live on in time and eternity. So sexual intercourse is a gift from God, made exclusively for a husband and a wife in marriage. The Hebrew word yada, transliterated into the English word as no, is the word used to describe sexual intercourse in the Old Testament. Yada describes a deep, personal, intimate knowledge of another. Sexual intercourse is a comprehensive, one-flesh union of heart, of mind, of spirit, and body. According to Pastor Tim Keller, sex is God's appointed way for two people to say reciprocally to one another, "I belong completely, permanently, and exclusively to you." It bonds both the husband and the wife to the offspring that their union produces, and thus to humanity's future. Some liken sex to a river. When it flows in its God-ordained channel, which is marriage, it's powerful, it's beautiful, and it's life-giving. But when a river floods and it overflows its banks, it's terribly destructive. In the Bible, sexual immorality is any type of sexual activity outside the bonds of marriage. The Bible treats sexual immorality very seriously, not because God is some kind of cosmic killjoy, but because He designed sex. He knows its power for good and for ill. And out of pure love, He graciously warns us of the brokenness that is unleashed by the abuse of sex. Sex isn't a toy or a plaything. It's a sacred and sovereign power that's strong enough to bring a new life into being, said Todd Wilson. Our sexual capacities are powerful, far too powerful to be used anywhere outside of marriage. They need the safe and stable environment that comes with a "till death do us part" commitment. And while sex is a good gift from God, sexual intercourse actually isn't essential for human flourishing. Jesus is our model of a life that was lived perfectly, and He had all the longings and desires of any man, and yet He was very content to be celibate. For all of its significance, sex must never take the place of the identity and purpose and meaning that we find in our relationship with God and the way that He created us. Today, it's common to think of sex as an entirely private act, but sex isn't only private. It has massive public consequences. Why? One word: children. G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Sex is an instinct that produces an institution, the family, a small state, or a commonwealth." Where ancient pagan cultures placed no limits on sexual behavior, Christianity worked a cultural revolution, wrote the cultural commentator Rod Dreher. It did this by restraining and channeling sex into monogamous marriage. Among its many other benefits, the biblical sexual ethic significantly elevated the cultural standing of women. No longer did a wife have to compete with others for her husband's love. It also had massive positive effects on children. The Christian sexual ethic ensured that most children were raised by their biological parents, which produced a host of positive social outcomes. A mountain of research confirms that children need more than anything the female mother and the male father who together made them, with adoption available for children whose natural parents are unable or unwilling to care for them. A culture that upholds these truths will thrive. Societies that discard them will collapse.
Live, a Douglas County high school teacher and track and field coach facing charges tonight. The sheriff's office arresting and charging Carrie Hood with a sexually assaulting a student.
Chicago Schools Watchdog releasing a really troubling report. More than 300 substantiated claims of misconduct just during the last school year, sexual misconduct. The allegations ranging from groping and grooming students to threats and even sexual assaults.
So how many people do you think wait for marriage to have sex?
Nowadays, probably like 10%, yeah.
I'm gonna go like 15%.
I think like 5. Do you think that people should wait until marriage to have sex?
Yeah, either way, it's really up to the person and your beliefs, so it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I think the same thing. It's like individual choice.
Well, everyone has their own beliefs, you know?
What do you think? Do you think that people should wait to have sex till marriage?
No.
Why not?
Because when you're young, you gotta like live your life to the fullest.
Before we get into it, here's a couple more examples to hang on the vine here. You got a 17-year-old sexually assaulted by a teacher, staff member, sexual relations with a 16-year-old. A teacher sent 4,000 texts to a female student. Gym teacher exposes himself to a female student. Students taken on trips by teachers. Is this a new phenomenon, the scale at which this is happening, and why is it happening?
Tragically, collapse is what we in the West are experiencing today. The sexual revolution that started in the 1950s has obliterated the truth about sex. Today, sex has been redefined. For many, it's little more than a recreational activity to be enjoyed entirely apart from any hint of commitment. With the advent of inexpensive and widely available birth control and virtually unlimited pornography, sex has been decoupled from marriage, procreation, children, and family formation. 100 years ago, Sigmund Freud taught us that our sex drive needs unhindered expression and that sexual repression leads to all manner of psychological disorders. For others, sex has become the source of personal identity and ultimate meaning. Young people today are taught that their sexual desires actually define them as human beings. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, viewed unbridled sex as actually a source of earthly salvation. For her, pregnancy was a disease. And following her lead today, many governments label abortion a form of essential health care. This demonic idea has led to more than 1 million deaths every year in America alone. Today, sex is not only separated from marriage and procreation and children and family formation, but even the male-female binary as well. Sex, defined as the male and female distinction, has been discarded, and it's been replaced by the subjective concept of gender identity. This is the natural outworking of a secular, postmodern worldview, one that rejects God and any form of external objective reality. In our postmodern world, everything is subjective. Every person defines reality for themselves, including their sexual identity. As Nancy Pearcey says, the sovereign, autonomous self will not tolerate having its options limited by anything that it did not choose, not even its own body. The rejection of the male-female binary has given rise to a chaotic proliferation of gender identities. While newborns are assigned a gender at birth by a doctor based on their genitalia, that's just a temporary marker. As the child grows, they're encouraged to explore their authentic gender identity that's based on their subjective feelings and sexual attractions, often with the help of peer groups on social media. Next, they're told to express themselves by changing their names, their pronouns, their clothes, their haircuts, their behaviors, and increasingly their bodies through hormone treatments and dangerous sex change surgeries. Others, including their parents, are encouraged and often coerced to respond by affirming and even celebrating their child's chosen gender identity. Anything less than complete acceptance will lead the child to suicide, they are told. We are only now coming to grips with the societal and cultural implications of discarding the male-female binary. Sex-specific restrooms and locker rooms and sports, they're all now up for grabs. When the male-female binary is abolished, so too is the natural family. Because when the law no longer recognizes biological sex, then it no longer recognizes biological parents and children's right to them. Where will this end? The sexual revolution has left in its wake a wasteland of empty, broken people, broken families, and children are paying the highest price of all. So, what understanding of sex do you want to shape society? Words matter. They're powerful. All genuine societal change, for better or worse, begins with a shift in language and definitions. God reveals the true definition of sex in His Word, the Bible. These true definitions are not just true for Christians, but they're true for everyone. But unless we as Christians know these true definitions and we build our lives on them, unless we defend these true definitions in public, our societies will be built on the false definitions and we will reap the terrible consequences. If you want to be part of upholding and defending truth about sex, we can help.